let's kind of go to the opposite of the People's Policy Project, this tax monstrosity, which is really, I mean, what's extraordinary, and I'll just pontificate for 30 seconds. I want your thoughts on this as well. One of the debates, in my view, between the actual left, social democrats, let's just use that as shorthand, versus the sort of, the center, or whatever, the technocrats, is that we're always sort of, in my view, asking for a more kind of holistic policy set. You can't just do things piecemeal. You can't sort of fight problems in one-off ways, and you have to kind of synchronize policy efforts. Well, man, like Republicans and those lobbyists, I mean, and granted it's a sloppy bill because it's so rushed, but they know how to do it. This is an integrated assault which would implicate everything from, first and foremost, obviously, accelerating inequality, but even down to potentially putting limits on what states could do in order to circumvent these savage cuts in the social safety net. So, I mean, maybe elaborate on the kind of how you view it politically and then sort of what's in this bill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. The Republicans do not have the same incrementalist, cautiousness of Democrats. They're very willing to say, you know what, we want to absolutely slash the corporate tax rate to be one of the lowest in the world, and we're just going to do it. And who cares if it causes deficits or debts, or we don't really care about that. Our goal is to cut corporate tax to the bone. We're going to do it, and then they do it. Whereas the Democrats take a lot longer and end up in some compromised position, even though all the compromising is done internally because they don't get any Republican support for their bills anyways. Right. So it's a kind of they're much more clean on their politics. They care about getting it done as opposed to kind of the procedural compromises that Democrats get into. In terms of the substance, I mean, I think that the biggest part of this and the whole point of this is they're cutting the corporate rate from 35% to 20%. And from there, that's basically the bulk of it. And then there's a lot of cleaning up around the edges to try to raise revenue to offset the huge amount of revenue that will be lost by that. And so you get things like eliminating the state and local tax deduction. You get things like capping the mortgage interest deduction. You get a lot of really small bore stuff like taxing graduate student stipends and on and on. But the net result is the very, very rich, the top 0.1% in the Senate bill stands to get a tax cut on average of $208,000 a year, and the poorest 20% will pay $10 extra in taxes each year. So that's sort of the on both ends, and then in the middle it just kind of walks up the ladder.
Right. So I mean, and then the other aspect of this, though, that I see playing out is that the bill itself is literally a straight redistribution of wealth from the poorest to the richest. But when people like Bob Corker, who come out, or Jeff Flake, and they do all this sanctimonious nonsense about how, they're so concerned about the deficit, which, like, the fact that the press still takes seriously the notion that Republicans care about the deficit, or even that the deficit is remotely important compared to these other issues, is embarrassing. But when they start talking about something like a trigger, well, if our fake budget projections that this massive, redistribution to the top doesn't create the kind of jobs that most people seem to know it won't, including, quite conservative economists at places like University of Chicago, then we need to have a trigger which is looking into dealing with the deficit, which all of a sudden gets us right back into the holy grail, cut Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think if you were trying to be sort of completely honest about what's going on here, you wouldn't analyze the tax bill in a vacuum, which is how most of the coverage has gone so far. In a vacuum, the tax bill basically cuts taxes really, really high on the rich and cuts taxes very, very little on the poor, and then the very poor pays a little bit more. Like on average, if you just look at the tax bill, you're like, it's just a huge tax cut for everybody, but mostly for the rich. But like the actual game is a two-step game: cut taxes and then come around on the other end and cut benefits on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and that's where the real redistribution is going to happen. Cut
Right.
benefits on those people in order to fund these tax cuts for the very affluent.
Right. So they're thinking strategically. I guess this is the thing, like, as morally grotesque and as horrifying as this is, like, this is they're synchronized in how they do it. And this is like, we need some type of large scale counter argument, both because it's necessary for saving a lot of people's lives and improving this country's well-being, but also because it's like, how can you possibly match up such a sort of coherent and fully spread worldview and way of doing things with kind of one-offs?
Yeah, I think what the Republicans are on track to do is something that they have been planning to do for 20, 30 years, basically. And they have a window, a really strangely created window, and they're going to try to push it through. And It's been the same thing forever. Block grant all of these benefits, as many benefits as you can to the state. Privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, cut taxes massively on the rich. That's been the program for decades for them. And they haven't had a good window to punch it through, and they finally do, and they're doing it. The equivalent window for the Democrats would have been in 2008 to 2010, when they could have transformed and punched through basically anything that they want. And instead, they spent over a year tweaking and twiddling with Obamacare on some faint hope that they would pull in Susan Collins or some other moderate Republican, which never happened.
Come on, Susan.
Use up the entire legislative calendar for that. And they didn't get anything else done. They didn't get the Employee Free Choice Act done. They didn't get the DREAM Act done. They didn't get any of these sort of big ticket items. And, if the Republicans are showing you sort of what the Democrats should have done in that period in the other direction.
And what they get done inside. So I have no problem admitting that, like, look, I think Obamacare and financial reform were modest improvements, right? And that translates particularly with Obamacare to like very real life outcomes. But it's all within a Republican playing field context. So if Republicans came into power and they were like, we have this massive, ambitious plan for Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare, and what we're going to do is we're going to sort of modestly trim benefits for people, in Social Security and Medicare, people who are already wealthy, and then, Medicaid, maybe we were more stingy with who could get in, which, I mean, that would be a lot because it already is an incredibly stingy program. But the point being, they would be playing inside the context. They come in and they go, we're going to fucking destroy this stuff. Democrats are always, and I think partially it's ideological, and then obviously partially that all of the structural forces, which we were talking about earlier, all favor wealth. And that obviously cuts across parties.
Yeah, definitely. The donor class in the Democratic Party, they are progressive in a very moderate way, right? They want to see education improved, especially for disadvantaged children. They want to see health care improved. Like they want to see these things improve, but they don't want to see their taxes go up by $5 million a year or whatever if they're making $100 million. That they're not interested in that. So that definitely moderates what's possible.
It could cut into a hooker budget. I mean, there's things to prioritize, and doesn't that create jobs too? Right.
You would think, there's a sickness in very affluent people that makes them think that, well, an extra million or two is really that's gonna make or break my happiness when probably it won't. But that's nonetheless where they are, and you need donors to run. You need donors to run parties, to run think tanks. You need donors for the whole apparatus to function, and so you're kind of bounded by the range of political ideas that those donors are interested in.
Yeah, no doubt. So,
hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos